Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Future of Work. It's the third of our five-part webinar series, Future Ready Economic Development Organization. My name is Swati Ghosh. I'm the Senior Director of Research at IEDC and one of the authors of our research paper, Future Ready, Preparing for Tomorrow's Economy, that was developed by our Economic Development Research Partners program. I will be a moderator today. We've already had two very successful webinars in this series. We talked about horizon scanning and visioning, and also the future of infrastructure last week. If you would like to access these webinars, they can be purchased in our bookstore. And today, we will be exploring the future of work, how technological advancement is changing the way we work, and what it means from an economic development perspective in the long run. We have three experts with us today who worked extensively on this topic, and I'll get to them in just a minute. Just a few housekeeping notes from IEDC. All attendees will be muted during the webinar. To ask a question of the speakers or to make a comment, please type that into the questions box, and I will address that at the end of the panelists' presentations and during the Q&A part. Also, within 24 hours of today's webinar, an evaluation will be emailed to you. Please complete the evaluation, as we really love to use the feedback to improve our web seminars in the future. At the end of the evaluation, you'll receive a link to download today's presentation, and you will also receive a link to download a free copy of the EDRP report that this webinar is based on. So, for today's topic, the future of work, I'd like to kick it off with just a little bit of an overview of the report itself. A quick recap, if you haven't had a chance to look at the report or joining us for the series for the first time. The report looks at things that economic developers should be thinking about over the next 10 years or so, and offers a lot of practical resources about how to go about thinking about the future. The basic premise is that technology is changing industries, it's changing the way we work and live, and also at the same time, technology itself is changing at a very fast pace, and that pace is becoming faster. So how can economic developers make sure their communities stay competitive in the future and are attractive to people? One of the highlights of the report is the Future Ready framework. It itself is divided into 7 themes that are likely to be of very high relevance to EDOs in the coming future. This is accompanied by a questions-based guide to help professionals think about the future at the organizational and at the community levels, and how to keep up with that fast pace of change. The way a community uses this framework will obviously depend on resources and the local context, but the hope was that at least it provides a starting point for a conversation around different topics that a community needs to think of. I'm not going to review the framework in detail. It's included in the paper, and if you haven't downloaded it already, I would encourage you to do so. In terms of looking at the future of work, one of the first things we did when we were researching the paper is look at what industries are projected to go through a massive transition in the future in terms of workforce. And what you see on your screen are the ones that are projected, according to BLS data, to have a growth of at least 1 million jobs in the period 2016 to 2026. Broadly speaking, that's healthcare and food. But we also looked at manufacturing and retail, and both of those are projected to decline. The important thing to note here is that the growth industries are not the industries that economic developers have traditionally focused on. Also, a lot of the jobs, if you look at the job categories, a lot of these jobs are typically low-paying and unappealing working conditions. So it brings us to the point of how can economic developers support these industries but also the point that economic developers need to think in new and different ways. One of the key things we found in the research is that automation is going to play a huge role. The BLS data itself doesn't actually figure in innovation. There are two separate studies, that one was done by Oxford University and the other by McKinsey Global Institute, that looks at that. And some people actually think that the BLS data might actually present an overly rosy picture of the future. So as you can see on your screens, the Oxford University study projects that it's going to be 47% of jobs in the US are at risk of being lost to automation. The McKinsey one looks at it in a slightly different way, but at least 60% of the occupations have at least 30% of their constituent activities that could be automated. And our research and talking to a number of experts, we thought that the truth probably is going to lie somewhere in the middle. There are several reasons why automation might not necessarily occur in every instance that it is technologically possible, at least not at the outset. These could include cost of development and deployment, supply and demand of labor, economic benefits of automation, and even regulatory and social acceptance. Would elected officials allow for such stuff to progress at a fast pace? But then, of course, there are going to be jobs that are created by those that are designing these automation systems. And the last component in terms of future of work that we looked at was the gig economy. It's also called the 1099 workforce sometimes, independent workers, freelancers, and the vast majority of it is facilitated through online platforms. 2016 research done by the National Bureau of Economic Research actually found that the contingent workforce had increased from 10% of the total workforce in 2005 to roughly 15% in 2015. Some other estimates place it a little higher, but either way, it's evident that gig economy workforce is increasing. People use it as a route back into work. Some use it as a temporary way to fund their goals, such as launching a business or going to college. And some do a patchwork of several gigs as the equivalent of a full-time job. And what communities are trying to do in support of this workforce, this gig economy, that scenario is kind of still emerging and unclear. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's first speaker, John Clifton, who is the Global Managing Partner of Gallup, an advisory firm that specializes in big data analytics of employees, customers, students, and citizens. John's mission is to help 7 billion citizens be heard on their most pressing work and life issues through the Gallup World Poll, the 100-year initiative spanning 150 countries. John is a non-resident senior fellow at Baylor University's Institute for Studies on Religion. He serves on the board of the Meridian International Center, Streetwise Partners, and Finder. Welcome to the webinar, John, and over to you.
Thank you, Swati, and also thank you to all of IEDC for putting together this really important webinar. Of course, as you mentioned, the topic of our webinar is the future of work, and one thing that's hugely on the minds of executives everywhere is what is it that their organizations need to do to not get disrupted? And what do they need to do internally in their organizations to make sure that they are responding quickly enough to their business needs? And again, this is a massive fear that all executives have, and it's been heightened recently precisely because of all the disruptions that are happening. So organizations are wondering what is it that they need to do in order to protect themselves. And one thing that management philosophy, if you will, have coalesced around is this concept of agility. And if their organization is more agile, it will help them better serve their customers and increase their chances of survival and also to be more competitive. So a lot of people have wondered, well, what is Gallup's position on agility? And naturally, like what Gallup does, we started researching the topic as much as possible, and we started researching it with the people who are most focused on it. So in terms of agility, let me just check to see that these slides work. You might ask, where did you start? So we started interviewing, doing stakeholder interviews with executives all across Europe and in the United States, and we just asked them, what does agility mean to you? And of course, with most business concepts or management concepts, people have different definitions. But if there are three things that everyone agreed on, it's this. One is there was some sort of structure that made you agile. Another, there was a mindset in the organization that they were agile. And the last piece is that they did it because they needed to adjust to respond quickly to business needs. So when we heard all those concepts, we distilled them together and we said, so if we're going to measure whether or not an organization is agile, we need to do it through these concepts. So we developed two questions that we began testing. One is around mindset, and the other one is around systems and process. And you can see both of them involves that other piece, which is respond quickly to business needs. But the first one in terms of mindset is, in my company, we have the right mindset to respond quickly to business needs. And we asked this on a 1 to 5 scale. The other part, systems and process, is in my company, we have the right tools and processes to respond quickly to business needs. Now, we started asking this across a number of countries in Europe and in the United States, and again, it was on a 5-point scale. We determined that if employees set a 5 on both of them, that organization was agile, or that they worked in an agile organization. If they set a 4 or higher on both items, we determined to be partly agile. And of course, if they said anything lower, we determined them to be not agile. So let's get into the results. What did we find? We found that in the 5 countries that we studied, 18% of people in the United States worked in agile companies. That was among the highest of the 5 countries that we studied. In France, it was 16%, Germany 10%, Spain 15%, and in the UK 13%. And of course, you can see the numbers for the others. Over a majority, though, in most countries, respondents said they worked in organizations that we determined to be not agile. Now, we looked into this deeper because, of course, in addition to just whether or not people were working in organizations that were agile, what were the massive drivers of those things, and what else did it lead to? We found that people that work in companies that are agile, all the good things that come of it. So, for example, we also asked people to tell us on a 1 to 5 scale, I had the feeling that my company is ahead of the competition. In agile company in the United States, 64% of people agree they do feel that the company that they work for is ahead of the competition. You'll see all the way down to non-agile, and again, I'm looking in the upper left-hand quartile of this graph, that 12% of people were agreed with that they were in not agile organizations. On the other hand, on the ledger, we asked people about whether or not they are confident in their company's financial future. In organizations that we determined to be agile, 76% of people agreed that they were confident in their company's financial future. So you do see that in places where people believe that they are working in agile organizations, they do see that their organizations are also competitive and that they have strong confidence in their financial future. It is also true, if you look to the bottom of this chart, it is also true in Europe. So you can see, for example, in agile organizations, 44% agree that their company is ahead of the competition. And obviously with financial future, 61% have confidence in their company's financial future in agile organizations. But it doesn't stop there, because there are 3 additional points that I want to bring up. One has to do with matrix teams. So again, we are on this concept of structure, but structure alone does not mean that people believe that you are agile. For example, we asked people, do you work mostly with people who report to the same manager? We also asked, do you work mostly with people who report to different managers? Or do you work equally with people who report to the same and different managers? In every single context was the equal amount of people who believe that they worked in agile organizations. The point being is, just because you have matrix teams does not mean that people have that mindset that they are in an agile organization. That's very important to those who think that perhaps structure is all that's needed to build an agile organization. The next piece is that, interestingly enough, one of the things that highly drives agility is communication. So for example, we just asked people point blank, how much time does your manager give you feedback? When we ask people who are in agile companies, a large percentage of people, 37%, that they talk to their manager daily or a few times a week, where a much smaller percent in agile companies, 17%, say yearly or less. Again, by the way, a big phenomenon in terms of communication from management is that it just never happens. So the rest of those percentages, why they don't add up to 100%, is because we have a large percentage of people who just say that they are not, of course, being talked to by their managers. In people where there was partly agile companies, 30% say that they talk to their manager daily or for a few times a week. And of course, in partly agile companies, 19% say they do yearly or less. All the way, if you flip to the bottom of non-agile organizations, in terms of communication from a manager, 17% say they get it daily, 34% say it only happens yearly. Again, communication is a huge factor in terms of agile organizations, and we'll show the impact of that just a little bit later. The last one, and what I think is perhaps the most interesting piece of our research, is a lot of times people who work in large organizations believe that that size of organization is what determines whether you're agile. What our research suggests is that that's not true. So in some of the places where we were able to look at the size of the organization where these employees worked, and we also looked to see whether or not they thought they were agile. And again, what we found is that size does not make an impact. So smaller organizations are not more likely to have employees that say we are agile. And large organizations are not less likely to say that they are agile. So size, again, does not matter in terms of this particular research study. Now, the next piece is what we found what the drivers are. We found that there were 8 things that shook out statistically on what drove these 2 particular items on agility. The first one is cooperation. So we just point blank asked people on a 1 to 5 scale whether or not they're satisfied with the cooperation between their department and other departments with which they work. Again, we found that's a significant driver of these 2 items, mindset and systems process. The next piece is speed of decision making. We just asked people whether or not they're satisfied with the speed of decisions being made at their workplace. The next piece is trial tolerance, whether or not people are given the freedom to make mistakes and whether or not they can learn from them. Again, a big part of what is a mindset. The next piece is empowerment, number 4, bottom right. In my company, people closest to the action are trusted to make decisions. Another major driver. 5, 6, 7, and 8. Number 5, the technology adoption. My company readily implements new technologies that help us to be more productive. Number 6 is just simplicity. In my company, we always look for the simplest way to get the job done. Number 7, knowledge sharing. In my company, we openly share information, knowledge, and ideas with each other. And the last one, innovation focus. I feel encouraged to come up with new and better ways of doing things. Of all the things that we tested, both qualitatively and quantitatively, these were the items, again, that statistically drive those other two components. Now, you might be wondering, how does America and how does Europe perform on each of these 8 particular items? Here are the results. So you can see on the cooperation in the United States, 19%, cooperation in Europe on the right side of the ledger is 24%. The thing that's pretty amazing is the United States and Europe do almost very similarly on both items. You see things like empowerment, the United States is 22%, whereas Europe is about 11 points or 50% higher than the United States, which is 33%. So there are a few differences here. Simplicity is another massive gap between the two, where the United States only scores 13% of when people are giving a 5 to that. Europe, on the other hand, where 29% are giving 5 to that. I'm going to get into methodology a little bit later. One of the challenges we have is that we did a phone survey for Europe and a web-based survey for the United States, which may account for some of the differences. And we continue to do research on these particular items, but I wanted to point that out. We're looking at these gaps as well. The next piece just goes to show the importance of each of these items individually. Again, you can see in agile organizations, 53% of people say that openness to innovation is happening, where in non-agile, it's only 4%. The differences are staggering across the board and just reinforces the point about how much these drivers and how critical they are to each of them. But I should say one of them does not drive it. In fact, you need far more than one, which is why you need almost all 8. So you can see, for example, if you only fill 1 to 2 elements in the United States, only 14% of those places that fulfill 1 to 2 elements find are agile. And you can see, of course, sliding all the way up to if you get 7 or 8 of those elements fulfilled, 86% of those particular organizations we determine are agile. You can see we see it as more impactful in the United States than we do in Europe, where it's only 71%. In fact, Europe, if 0 of the elements are fulfilled, we have virtually no one saying that those organizations are agile. Again, some of this account for the methodological differences, but again, it goes to show that if you want to be an organization where your employees are saying both of those elements are met, each of these 8 things are incredibly important for leaders to take into account. So last point is methodology. As I had mentioned, the United States was done online. However, we pulled these and randomly selected from our panel. Our panel is a group of individuals that recruit from random digit dial surveys. We've had a nightly survey, a mail survey, and at the end we ask them, would you like to participate in the Gallup panel? So it is a probability-based sample about how it was collected. It's not an opt-in survey, which of course is not probability-based. Everybody that we've asked is employed by an employer, either full-time or part-time. We did not include people, of course, that are not employed. And of course, all of them are weighted to be representative. When I said Europe, you can see those are the 4 countries that we included: France, Germany, Spain, and the UK. We did 1,000 in each country. Of course, very different in the United States, where we did almost 6,000. And as I mentioned earlier, these were phone interviews. So that is the study that we did on agility. We are encouraging almost all the organizations that we work with to start testing to see whether or not they're agile, so that we can build a very robust database and start comparing whether or not organizations are in the top quartile, the bottom quartile in terms of agility. And of course, Gallup, one thing they're known for is this thing known as Gallup Access. A number of organizations, about 1,200 today, sign up for Gallup Access, where they can, of course, use Gallup's famous Q12 employee engagement questions, but they can also now add these in the next month to see whether or not their organization, their employees feel like working at an organization that is agile. So Swati, again, thank you for allowing Shane and I to come on here and share some of our latest research. I know that we're going to finish all 3 of the presentations, but at the end, I'll be available for questions. And of course, I put my business card on here. So if anyone would like to have a discussion afterward and follow up with it, I'd be happy to do so. So Swati, thank you again.
Thank you, John. That was a really interesting presentation, and I've, of course, looked at that study too. Our next presenter is Deborah Lyons, who's a principal at Lyons Consulting, specializing in workforce development strategies designed to help communities improve their economic development advantage. Lyons has over 30 years of expertise in education and workforce development. Most recently, she served as Director and Principal Strategist for Employer Engagement at ACT Inc. While there, she utilized her experience in leading workforce development initiatives aligned to the needs of industry and economic development. She organized, recruited, and served as Executive Director to the National Workforce Solutions Advisory Board, an organization of C-level business leaders who provide guidance to ACT on work-ready communities and engaging employers in adopting its workforce solutions. Thank you for joining us today, Deborah. We'll turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, Swati, and I want to also thank IEDC as well for inviting me to be a part of today's webinar. My name is Deborah Lyons, and my topic is the future of jobs. So what I'd like to talk about today is the future of jobs, which is of great interest to economic developers, and having a skilled workforce to fill the future of jobs is critical. So the topics I'm going to be talking about today will be the 4th Industrial Revolution and the future of jobs in the age of I-4, and how to prepare your communities. In the United States, we've undergone a series of industrial revolutions, each one having a profound impact on the economy and jobs, and each one driven by a game-changing technology advancement. In the first industrial revolution, it was steam engines that led to mechanization, and you moved from craftsmen into factories to house the size of the equipment. And we had cities emerging as industrial hubs. In the second industrial revolution, it was driven by energy changes, electricity and oil, the production of steel, the internal combustion engine, and electrical power driving mass automation. In the third industrial revolution, called the digital revolution, and that's where we moved from analog to digital, and was really driven by laptop computers being connected together on the internet. Now, we've actually entered the fourth industrial revolution, which is cyber physical systems. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and what does that mean. The dominating technology in I4 is increased computing capability and greater mobility, artificial intelligence, big data analytics, and cloud technology with increased storage and speed, all interfacing with the biological world, blurring the lines between digital, physical, and biological. What's the difference? What's different here from the third industrial revolution, or I3? It's velocity, scope, and systems impact. Velocity being the speed of technology advancements, scope, the connecting of billions of people, and system impact is being disruptive. Some examples of I4 technology would include self-driving cars, drone technology. It's really developing technology to improve people's lives and better environmental asset management. So what's the impact of I4 technology in the future of manufacturing? It will be automated machines connected via the web in a system that can visualize the entire production chain and make its own decisions. Some of the challenges are going to be security and privacy. Another challenge will be who's going to be in control. So I want to, I'm looking for, there we go. So what's the effect differentiator in all of this? And that's going to be having a prepared workforce. Historically, industrial revolutions have been disruptive to the workforce, but eventually adjustments have been made and everything has moved forward. All industrial revolutions have led to an increase in employment because greater productivity has led to job growth and job change. So to fully prepare for the I4 workforce changes, if you're prepared, you will benefit. And if we're not prepared, we're going to see significant or greater inequality. So being prepared is going to be critical, but the time to prepare is contracted here, creating a sense of urgency that's really being felt today. Economic developers are feeling that urgency everywhere they look. When they're doing strategic planning, at the top of their list is workforce development. So let's now take a look at historically what's happened in education over the changes through the Industrial Revolution. If you look around 1969 on this graph, and we know we talked about 1980 as really being the start of that third Industrial Revolution, some folks actually look at 1969 when we landed a man on the moon. But if you look at historically over these changes, you've seen that we've had a pretty steep increase in high school graduation, and we had a continuous change and increase in college graduates. So those things are all good. But in today's world, some of the things that ought to be concerning us is a flattening of this high school graduation rate and the fact that we're not seeing a greater increase in the rate of college graduation. And realizing now that the United States workforce is really now competing globally. And so let's now take a look a little bit at what does that mean. If you look at the education based on 2015 Program for International Student Assessment Comparison, because again, industry is globally competing now. And so take a look at where the US students look relative to the global economy or the global workforce. And if you look at reading, that's really where we're the strongest, and we're at 24. If you look at science, we're at 28. And if you look at math, we're at 36. It's really important to understand that in the STEM world, it's math and science that comprise the ability to produce that STEM workforce, that science, technology, engineering, and math skill set. So let's take a look now that we've taken a look at what's going on with our education, what are some of these concerns, and where is the U.S. globally. Let's now take a look at one of these jobs, really looking at those jobs, or I should say one of these sectors, the information technology sector. So if we look at that, since the Great Recession, we've had about 900,000 net new jobs in tech occupations. And so that averages, if you look at, over a period of 8 years where we saw that growth, somewhere around 110,000 jobs per year. So, and these are net new jobs. These are not replacement jobs. And that's real important to understand. So now let's take a look at what does the pipeline production look like for the U.S. Well, this is some data from ACT, the 2016 STEM report, showing out of how many high school students, how many were interested in going into what we'll call computer science careers. And there were about 2.1 million students that took the ACT exam. So I would say 2.1 million high school seniors. That's approximately 56% of the high school seniors in the country. So when you look at that, in the interest inventory, ACT determined a little over 1 million of these students expressed an interest in STEM career. Now, out of those students, 12% of them had an interest in computer science careers. That translates into somewhere around 117,000. But what begins to be concerning here, there's only been a 3% increase in interest in information technology or computer science careers as a major. So now let's look at this just a little deeper in terms of readiness. If you look at where those students are ready in terms of their benchmarks for STEM, we'll see that somewhere around 29% of these students were fully ready with math and science and ACT scores. Another 12 were within 2 points of those benchmarks. Now, one of the things I do want to share with you is the benchmark for math for a STEM career is a 27. That compares with traditional college readiness, which is at 22. The science benchmark on the ACT is 25, which compares with traditional college readiness, which is at 23. The STEM benchmark is a combination of 26 on math and science, because you need greater proficiency in those areas to go into STEM professions. That benchmark indicates the probability of students getting a B or higher on those freshman year of courses. So if we look at this 41%, taking a look at that total as being, let's say, prepared, if you take that times 117,000, that's about a little under 48,000 students across the country were ready for computer science careers. Now, I'm going to be really optimistic and say all 48,000 of them went to college and in computer science. If you look at the traditional college graduation rate of 59%, that would put us at best at about a little over 28,000 students graduating ready for technology careers. That's 25% of what that projected growth was that I just showed you. So if you want to understand an IT skills gap, this is where it is and this is what it looks like. But now let's go on now and talk bigger about jobs and what that looks like holistically in the fourth industrial revolution. So we're going to look at this interface and moving on of how are we going to prepare individuals for all jobs in the world of I4. So in I3, the company perspective was automation will replace jobs It's a little bit of what Swati was talking about initially when she talked about the report that they had put together, that automation is a replacement. But not in On4. There's a transformation going on in the workforce where we're moving from replacement to companies leveraging technology as tools to complement or enhance human labor. And we call that the augmentation of jobs. An example of the augmentation of jobs would be doctors or using new medical devices and technology for making diagnoses. Another one that's probably one that you can really relate to, everybody can, is the use of search engines, in everybody's jobs. These are just examples of where technology can begin to augment a job. So if we can, again, begin to understand this future thinking of job augmentation in terms of preparing this future workforce and the improving of jobs, we're going to be able to manage this change, manage this workforce development in a rapidly changing workforce environment. If we are not very proactive and not managing this, it's going to lead to a greater skills gap. So now let's take a look at some data, and this is from the Future of Jobs survey that was done by the World Economic Forum. And they began to take a look at what percentage of current jobs today are being automated. And so if we take a look at these top skills here, we'll see that it's somewhere, a small percentage, anywhere from 23% to 19% of these jobs in these top 3 skills that are being automated. The transition of increasing automation over the next 5 years is somewhere between 8 to 10%. What that tells you is that these are skills that are still going to be needed, but again, they will be slightly augmented going into the future. When you look at the bottom skills, though, such as looking for and receiving job-related information or information and data processing, we begin to see a much bigger impact of technology in these particular jobs, moving somewhere greater than near 50% to greater than 50% in the next 5 years in terms of augmentation. So let's go back now and look at what are these skills at the top here that the augmentation is going to be smaller, the augmentation of technology in these jobs. Reasoning, decision-making skills, coordinating, developing, managing, and advising, and communicating and interacting. So again, these are skills that will undergo slight augmentation in the future. So let's just take a look now when we talk about skills, how these relate to jobs and occupations. Occupations is what educational and training institutions are developing programs for. They develop programs based on occupations. Occupations are comprised of a variety of jobs, that I'm showing here. Every job is composed of tasks, and every task is composed of skills. And so this is what's really important in understanding the impact of the augmentation of technology into jobs, is being able to really look at tasks and the skills to perform those tasks. So let's take a look now, is we're evaluating these tasks for automation in a particular job and evaluating what tasks will remain being performed by a person. So we look at taking those tasks that can be automated and moving them out, and we look at evaluating the tasks that an individual can do and understanding what those are. And now we've got to begin to add this human technology interface skill, because the more technology is integrating into a job, the more we've got to look at what is that interface of that person to that technology and what's the skill that they need. And then how can we expand the job duties and skill set for those individuals who now, when we take that more mundane work and automate it, we are freeing up time to do other work. And that really is where the preparation will be. And that's what's exciting about workforce development in the age of I4. So one of the other things that we want to be mindful of when in looking at this with the augmentation of jobs is that the ability that as jobs continue to change, skills needed then will be changing and adapting over. So that's going to begin to impact the skills for hiring versus training. And that'll be something that human resource professionals really begin to take a look at. What are the skills that we have to have? And what are the skills that we can develop or retrain on the job? And that will be another consideration as looking for moving forward with really doing that education, workforce development, and training for the jobs of the future. So now I want to just take a moment now focusing on some specific skills, looking at 2018 and looking out into the future. And if you look at the skills here, we can just look at some of the skills between 2018 and 2022. And, you know, a lot of them are the same. What's interesting is the priority of them begins to change over the next 5 years. I've noted in red here a couple of these skills that are new, and that's technology design and programming and systems analysis and evaluation. So those are some trending new skills that'll be emerging in 2022. But you see at the top of the list is analytical thinking and innovation. One of the things, interestingly enough, that is really moving up is this active learning and learning strategies. So these are things that need to be taken into consideration by our education community as they're preparing this future workforce. So I want to just take a moment because I have a lot of economic developers on the phone, and I know manufacturing is near and dear to your heart. And so I'm going to take a moment to talk about I-4 in the world of manufacturing and what's happening in this manufacturing skills gap. Deloitte and the Manufacturing Institute put together their 2015 report on the skills gap in U.S. manufacturing. And they talk about how 3.5 million jobs will need to be filled over the next 10 years. And in this report, they talk about how 700,000 of them will be new, but the majority of those will be created from retirements or replacement. But I want to share some information I looked at very recently, the economic growth in manufacturing in 2018. And from January to September alone, 189,000 manufacturing jobs were created. So we are going from 70,000 new jobs per year on average that was predicted to more than double that in today's labor market. So the skills gap in manufacturing is being exacerbated. And so if you in economic development are feeling that urgency, I wanted you to begin to understand and see, you know, why this is. So let's take a look now at what are these specific skills that are so urgent on the minds of manufacturing executives. Well, 70% technology and computer skills, 69% problem-solving skills, 67% is that basic technical training, and 60% are math skills. So that is somewhat aligned with what the World Economic Forum was sharing on what are some of these top skills and how are things going to be changing and emerging. So now I want to take a moment and look at another thing that is going to be impacting the workforce of the future. And that's the demographics. It's going to be the generations that are going to be employed in the workplace. Traditionally, if you looked at 1996, the majority of the workforce was made up of 25 to 44-year-olds. 55 and plus was only about 12%. But if you go to 2016, you're now seeing that it's fairly even. The makeup of the working age population, 45 and above, is fairly close to the population of 25 to 44. And that projection is going to continue in the future. You know, some of these reasons are, you know, in the United States, and this data is from the United States, is that less children, people are living longer, people are delaying retirement, you know, so, and there's a growing need of jobs. So this demographic is here to stay and is projected to be this way into the future. So now let's take a look at the industry approach of hiring, of how they are going to be looking at that workforce in the future. And there's three things they're going to be looking to do to get this workforce aligning with this new emerging I-4. It'll be hire, it'll be looking at automation, and it'll be looking at retraining. So I want to just take a moment and talk a little bit further about what does that mean. Looking at the hiring, according to the World Economic Forum, where the strategies will be looking to hire new people with these new skills for new technologies. That's about 84%. So how do we look to prepare for that if that's going to be the dominant for the future workforce? Well, we've got to look at making sure there's mastery of fundamental foundational workplace skills, ensuring digital fluency, technical skills, and systems analysis, developing innovation and creativity and leadership skills, developing mastery of self-training and a mindset for lifelong learning, instilling career exploration and navigation. And navigation means career navigation. Mastering occupational skills for current and emerging careers. Instilling a sense of personal brand, building entrepreneurial mindsets, and importance of developing a professional network, and ensuring documenting and communicating a skill mastery. So these are going to be important considerations in developing that future workforce. But now let's take a look at what's the other strategy here, and that's going to be the retraining of existing employees, and that was looking at 72%. And the reason that is a result of those demographics I was showing you, is that you will have this more generational continuity across the labor market. And so this retraining piece becomes important. And we look at the time employers are expecting to invest in training. They're looking at somewhere around the neighborhood of 30% are looking to invest anywhere from 3 to 12 months in the future workforce. And about 25% are looking at a reskilling taking up to 3 months. Now, the reason that this is important and why I put this in here for economic developers is because if your workforce development strategy cannot only be on that emerging workforce, you need to have a workforce development strategy for transitioning and increasing the skill set of the existing workforce. So preparing that future workforce becomes a balance, with education and structured learning, programs of study incorporating digital literacy, this social emotional learning, career navigation, and all of that measured by academic credentials and in a portfolio. In lifelong learning, it's about self-learning, work-based learning, continuous training, still digital literacy, social and emotional mastery, measured by badges, non-credit credentials, occupational credentials, licensures, etc. It's going to be a balance of these things in preparing your future workforce. So some of the questions that come to mind here is, will academic degrees be enough? No. Will student portfolios emerge that verify skill mastery? Most likely. Will student portfolios be portable? Can they become a part of lifelong learning? I would hope so, and we should all hope so. And will non-credit and online courses continue to grow? Absolutely. So these are the kinds of things you as economic developers will need to think about in your communities if you want to continue to be able to be prepared to capture the business in I-4. And again, all of this is going to be done in this new workplace demographics. There's got to be this open thinking across generations, this mutual learning between generations. And so that's got to enter into a part of your thinking as you are doing your workforce development for the future. So I just want to summarize some things that economic developers can do to prepare for the future of work. Gain an understanding of the fourth industrial revolution. Help community leaders understand its impact on business recruitment, retention, and expansion. Ensure workforce development strategies are part of community economic development plans and focused on rapidly changing job markets. Work with the education community to ensure student preparation focuses on skills needed for success in the future job market. Cultivate workforce development plan to grow technology skills and digital literacy skills. Ensure workforce development plans focus on both pipeline development and current workforce retraining. And ensure implementation of workforce strategies have irrefutable proof of the skilled workforce and your community's differentiators. I want to thank you for your time today. I'm Deborah Lyons, Principal at Lyons Consulting. Look me up on LinkedIn. Contact me. There's my contact information below. I hope you follow me on Twitter. And if you want to have any further discussions on how to prepare your future workforce, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you again for allowing me to be a part of this presentation, and I look forward to being available to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Deborah. That was an excellent presentation. And just a reminder to everyone that if you have any questions for John, for Deborah, and for our upcoming speaker, Shane McFeely, please send them in through the questions box, questions, comments, and we'll pose them to our speakers at the end of our presentations. So with that, we're at the last presentation for today. It's by Dr. Shane McFeely, who's a researcher on Gallup's Global Practice Team. With a PhD in Industrial Organizational Psychology from the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Shane has previously worked as an administrator in the Omaha Public Schools District in their research division. And currently at Gallup, he works across multiple subject matters related to workplace effectiveness, employee experience, K-12 education, and the future of work. In this role, he conducts qualitative and quantitative analyses to create new insights for workplace leaders. Thank you for joining us, Shane. We're going to hand over control to you.
Thank you very much, Swati, and again, thank you to John and Deborah for presenting some really compelling data around this. And I think just thank you to the IEDC members and the research partners for taking on such an important and large topic. You know, as I was reading through the report on Future Ready, Preparing for Tomorrow's Economy, I was really drawn in by the depth, the level of depth that you guys had. And you know, what was nice is Gallup has a lot of information and research that we've done on our own where on a lot of these topics. So it was really good to compare and contrast across those two. And so just kind of referring back to Swati's framework earlier, we have some topics at Gallup. We have some reports around millennials, AI in the workplace, artificial intelligence, and how it might change the future of work. We're working on a perspective paper about boomers, which kind of covers what Deborah was talking about around reskilling and rethinking what it looks like as employees exit the organization and start to think about retirement. So I would just give that shout out that we have you know, some full-blown reports and in-depth articles and research on many of these topics for free. So I would encourage you to go to the Gallup website. One of those of interest, and what I'm here to talk to you about today, is really the gig economy. So we've been studying the gig economy for the past 2 years, both qualitatively via focus groups and one-on-one interviews with gig workers, but also, as John mentioned, we have a probability-based panel where we conduct a great deal of our research, and we've conducted a few specifically looking at this topic of the gig economy. So really, when we talk about the gig economy, we're really talking about multiple types of alternative work arrangements. We kind of approach this similar to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where we included folks that are independent contractors, online platform workers, contract firm workers, on-call workers, and temp workers. But really, we define gig workers as those folks who are working independently. They have some autonomy over their work, and they typically work on a per project or short-term basis, and they just don't have those typical long-term traditional employee-employer relationships with their organization. And when we looked at folks responding about their primary job, we found that 29% of all workers, that's full-time and part-time, had some type of alternative work arrangement in some capacity. And we also found that while a majority of them say that they kind of prefer this type of work, they say so less so than sort of those traditional workers. You know, part of, I think, maybe some of the debate around the gig economy hinges upon whether or not folks are doing this work out of a sense of necessity, in that there aren't other job alternatives out there, or are they doing this out of a choice, that sort of, can I be my own boss? When we looked at both part-timers and those with multiple job holders, so those folks that maybe have a side hustle or a side gig that they're often referred to as, we found about 36% of all U.S. workers are participating in the gig economy. And, you know, and we also found that they're, again, more likely to, or sorry, they're less likely to work full-time than traditional workers, but again, they're doing so more out of choice, that they don't want to work as many hours, that they're finding the right employment that fits their life. Again, because we're Gallup and we have one of the greatest assessments in the history of employee engagement, the Q12, we also asked them about their employee engagement, and that's when we really started to see differences within the type of gig that folks did, which I'll get into. And that led us to kind of this sort of what we're calling a tale of two gig economies, where some of those independent gig workers who can kind of be their own boss are really faring well and having those positive work experiences that are promised by the gig economy. And some of those that are more contingent gig workers, and I'll define what that is here in a minute, they're really they're doing no better off than perhaps traditional workers, but again, they're not going to receive those benefits related to healthcare and you know, things of that nature. So again, when we talk about who is in the gig economy, first we start with contract firm workers. These are employees who work for a company, and that company provides their services to another entity on kind of a project or contractual basis. An example of this would be a traveling nurse that does a short stint at different hospitals or different contracting firms. The other one, which is probably most well known, is an independent contractor. These are folks that provide goods and services under a contractual agreement. Again, an example of that would be like a freelance graphic designer who might log on to Upwork and find jobs through there or through their network. On-call workers, those are those folks that work on an as-needed basis. Again, this isn't people that do on-call work in addition to their regular jobs. So we know that, you know, police officers and doctors often have to work on-call shifts, but these are folks that work only on call solely. So an example of that would be like a substitute teacher that goes to multiple school districts and can work for them if they choose. The next, and what Deborah kind of covered of how technology is changing and really why we're focused on the gig economy really right now, is those online platform workers. That's going to be workers who find short jobs or tasks through a mobile or online marketplace that typically connects them directly with the customer. So that would be your Uber drivers, your TaskRabbit folks, and those sorts of folks. And then the last one is going to be the temporary workers. Those are people who have short-term work arrangements, and they're often assigned to them by a temp agency. And so again, you know, part of what this really means is talking about the growth of the gig economy. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics has had multiple estimates. Now, our estimate is not necessarily comparable to what they have in the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So, you know, I'll give you an example. That they use some exclusion criteria that we kind of just left open, and I know that they do so likely out of trending purposes. But like, for instance, contract firm workers. In the BLS definition, they would have to work on site at that customer's place of work. You know, for ours, we kind of just ask them if they're a contract firm worker, irregardless of whether or not where they work. I think, you know, that kind of really points to where technology is changing. But again, that those online platform workers here, again, or I guess I should start with 29% of workers have primary job that is gig. About half of those are considered independent contractors, and then we have about 7% that are those online platform workers. You know, that have really been enabled through technology. You'll notice for those folks doing the mental math here that these don't add up. So each of these categories don't add up to the 29%, but really that just means that someone can be an independent contractor and work, for instance, on an online platform for that gig. When we asked multiple job holders, so really asking about their primary and secondary jobs, we saw about 36% of workers that were considered gig. This would be folks that either have maybe 2 gig jobs, sort of that patchwork that Swati was discussing earlier. That might include somebody who has a traditional job that they've had, but might also have that side gig or side hustle where they're driving Uber maybe in the evenings to sort of maybe make up for money or to have a different work experience. Again, we asked them a little bit about the hours that they work and whether or not that's what they were looking for. The idea here being that many are looking towards the gig economy as basically an opportunity where folks can fit their work around their life. So for those that are maybe stay-at-home mothers, or they might be taking care of the health of a loved one, they really want to work in some capacity to maximize their time, but perhaps can't be as flexible for a lot of standard work that we think about. So when we asked them if they're working more than 30 hours a week, gig workers were much less likely to say that they were. However, when we asked, would you want to be working more hours, you know, more of them compared to traditional workers said that, you know, I'm working less and it's by design. When we asked, again, looking at that preference versus choice, you know, are you doing your preferred type of work, or would you like to have another job? You know, with this question, we're really trying to get at, you know, are they seeking this out of preference, or is this really out of choice? And while there's some differences within different types of gig workers, we generally found that the majority of them said that they're doing their preferred type of work. However, they're less likely than traditional workers to say that they're doing their preferred type of work. So again, I think there is a little bit of bifurcation in terms of, you know, are you doing this more out of choice or more out of necessity? And again, we asked about their employee engagement. So we asked them the Gallup Q12. And when we originally looked at the data of just traditional versus gig workers, we had fairly similar engagement levels, 27% engaged versus 29%. But then when we looked at the type of gig worker that we were talking about, those sort of independent contractor online platform workers, they really scored very high on that metric. But those that are kind of more contingent in nature, those contract firm workers, on-call workers, and temporary workers, they scored much lower. And this is where we really started to see kind of differences based on the type of gig. And that kind of leads into where we looked at a whole variety of workplace experiences, including belongingness, whether or not they have autonomy and creativity, do they have shared goal setting with their, it could be manager, or do they do the goal setting themselves? Do they view their job as secure and stable? Do they have motivating and fair pay? Some of those. And if you look at here, here's where we, so the black check marks or the lines are the traditional workers, and then the dark green lines are those independent gig workers. So those are those folks that can really be their own boss and usually don't work for another entity. We see that they have the vast amount of positivity out of this gig economy. The only part where they're actually scoring lower than traditional workers is really around that getting paid timely and accurately. So we hear that a lot with independent gig workers, that they're not able to often, get their invoices in and get paid in a timely and accurate manner. But again, some of those things that we know about gig economy, such as flexibility and hours perfect for me, really good again in that those independent jobs, but those contingent jobs are about the same as traditional workers. But again, you got to think that those contingent workers aren't getting healthcare benefits or unemployment, or a lot of those benefits that come with being a part of an organization. And so with that, I think we are going to go to some additional questions. Again, I didn't put my my things up here, but feel free to find me on LinkedIn. But I would also suggest checking out our perspective paper on the gig economy and alternative work arrangements. And with that, I'll turn it over to Swati.
Thanks, Shane. And thank you to all our presenters for really thought-provoking and excellent presentations. Just a reminder to all the attendees to keep sending in the questions and comments you have for our presenters. Deborah, I have a first question for you. You talked about retraining workers and how that's going to be extremely important. And there is some debate around where that responsibility falls. Is it on the individual? Is it on the part of the government or community? Is it on businesses? And I just want to see what your thoughts are on who should be responsible for retraining workers.
Well, thank you so much, whoever asked that question. That's an excellent question to ask. And, I think if my advice to offer is, if we look to answer the question about who's responsible, I think it becomes more challenging to solve the problem. So my answer would be all of the above. I think from terms in the community, it would really be about planning, engaging. I think the community could actually help ensure that both employers, understand their role, along with the education institution, which brings it back to, I think it's, that business side, understanding that there is a sense of benefit from doing that. It was interesting because Shane was sharing some of that engagement data. When you actually historically begin to look at employee engagement and the impact on the positive impact on the company, the ability to offer career advancement and retraining is huge. So there are a lot of benefits to companies who actually take this on that really will benefit their bottom line. And again, looking at those demographics is something they definitely want to do. In terms of individuals, I thought Shane did a great job summing up that gig economy. What I was trying to share originally in some of the thinking I expressed in the educational institutions is we have to really help students of the future understand that they are all mini entrepreneurs. They have to have their own personal brand. Individuals are responsible for their own careers and their career navigation. That includes lifelong learning. So their opportunity to navigate, take responsibility and ownership for that training, and also to be able to document that training, so they have irrefutable proof and can easily communicate it. So I think a strategy of all of the above And if those communities that do that are definitely going to get ahead of the curve in what's changing as a result of the industrial, of I4, the Industrial Revolution.
Great, thank you. Shane, we have a comment or a request from you if you're able to share the questions posed in the gig economy survey. And if it's something that you can send to me and we can send it to the attendees, that would be fine.
Yeah, so we asked a great deal of questions. One of, I guess, to get at the categories in which we define it, in how we define the gig economy, that is fully in our perspective paper. That is the gig economy and alternative arrangements, and that's free of charge on our website. So. You know, that would outline every single question that we asked of them, as well as basically how we put them in their different categories. So that's going to be on that paper. The other thing in terms of the engagement items, the Q12, again, you know, there's lots of opportunity on Gallup.com where we publish the verbatims of those items. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that should be good. But related to the Q12, we have a question. Did Gallup adapt the Q12 for use with gig workers? Some of the questions about, for example, about supervisors or fellow employees, etc., have that traditional worker type of approach.
Yep. Really, really good question. And in fact, that is kind of how we started this research, is we thought, you know, do we have a similar sense of what it means to be engaged as a gig worker? You know, I think that's really going to depend. So, you know, they talked about how in some cases you may or may not have a supervisor. You know, again, when we took to a more liberal kind of definition of the gig economy, that's going to also include folks who actually are going to be employed by an employer and may have a supervisor and may even have two supervisors. So if you think about a contract, contractual agreement, you're going to have somebody who is your hiring entity, but then also someone at the who's doing basically the account management for that firm's client. So in that case, often you may have two bosses. But to your point, we did see lower scores for some of those supervisor items, and as well as some of those teamwork items. So, you know, basically my coworkers committed to quality. Some of those items, depending on the type of work arrangement that they had, we saw some big differences there. This is also why we asked that second battery of questions. So we asked another 13 questions, and if you look at those, a lot of them are more transactional in nature. So, you know, what does it mean to have a good relationship with a gig worker? Is it really just about doing the work in a timely and accurate manner and getting paid in a time, you know, more transactional, getting paid in a timely and accurate manner? Perhaps they don't need, you know, obviously things like career growth may or may not fall within the sort of scope of that hiring entity. But good point on differentiating between gig and traditional employers' kind of definition of what engagement means.
Staying on the gig economy topic, healthcare, retirement, sort of security of your future have been some concerns, and I know that there are communities that are trying to grapple with that, and surveys have shown that there's a very small percentage of gig economy workers that actually end up saving for retirement or have healthcare coverage and those types of things. Is that something that Gallup looked into? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we asked about healthcare just briefly, where do they get their healthcare? I mean, and the results weren't necessarily surprising. So gig workers are much less likely to get, so they go more so through the independent market. Now there are some sort of pools that have been you know, getting together in terms of gig workers, and like, so I'm thinking of like the freelancers union. They often offer things like retirement and or benefits or healthcare where you can pool together your money. I would also say that a lot of gig workers are coming in here sort of to supplement what should have been their retirement. So we actually saw that boomers, baby boomers, were really active in the gig economy, especially on a part-time basis. We sort of kind of were reading between the lines and thinking that those folks may not be ready for retirement right now, so are they supplementing their retirement with a sort of this gig job? But you know, apart from that, we did not look at like how much they're saving today and how much they're kind of preparing all of the those benefits and sort of future planning around what they should be doing.
Okay. Thanks. The next question is for John. You mentioned that the size of any company's workforce did not correlate with agility. Do you have a breakdown for the size of businesses included in the survey, and what were the size classes?
No breakdown other than, you know, the methodology in terms of what we did is we asked people what the size of their organization was, and then just simply looked at the correlation based on what people were saying, how big their correlation was, and whether or not they said that the organization where we worked was agile. So definitely something that we can explore further, and our sample size only allowed us to really explore that in Germany. And we haven't fully explored it in our data set in the US, but it's definitely something that we're going to do.
Okay. The next question is for Deborah. Has your research shown any value to unions or organized labor as sources of retraining and upskilling? This seems to have particular relevance to the question of personal brand.
Could you repeat that question again, just because of, just so I can make sure I answer it appropriately?
Sure. I think they're asking if the research has shown any value to unions or organized labor becoming engaged with retraining and upskilling of workers. Also, as it would be relevant in terms of, you know, boosting your personal brand. So, place of unions.
I actually think, yeah. I just want to make sure, because they did go to personal brand. So yeah, so I'm going to take that question as folks that have completed an apprenticeship, you know, program and found employment. You know, a lot of the folks that have done that, many of them are with some larger companies who do have unions within the companies. And, you know, of course, they do continue to develop and train those people. So, so I think for those individuals who belong to a union who are ending up with larger companies, I think that should be a part of that you know, that business investment in their training. But I think it's an intriguing question, because I do think there are opportunities possibly for organized labor to maybe go back in and take a look at, are there things we can offer, you know, to the workers who maybe have completed programs 5-10 years ago? What's changed, you know, since these individuals have graduated? You know, are there technological, you know, impacts, you know, that we can help them, you know, reskill? You know, are there opportunities for us to work with their employers? You know, I think innovation and being very creative about how do we do these things to ensure this workforce is skilled, knowing this workforce is going to be in the market longer, you know, than in the past. So I think it's a great question, and I think if that, whoever that individual is who asked that and others on the phone, I think it's definitely worth exploring if it fits the dynamics of your community.
Okay. Going back to the gig economy, Shane, have you seen any trends in the gig economy by industry sector? So are there some specific industry sectors that are more attractive or more aligned with gig economy type of work than others?
Yeah, no, really good question. I think, you know, to answer that, I would look at, what have been those industries that have typically been sort of associated with the gig economy. And when we did our research, that's where we saw a lot of the growth. So if you think about arts or artists or some of those type of industries are growing. Transportation certainly based on some of the advances in technology there. Now, I would also say though, when we kind of looked at the growth, there seemed to be growth throughout every industry. So, I even like if you take something like those online platform workers, today, depending on the occupation, you can almost find a gig economy equivalent for just about any type of job. So, if there are in-house lawyers and counsel, you can also go to I think it's like Get Counsel, and you literally have an app to where you can pull up lawyers. I mean, and so I guess what we've really seen is that there's technology advances in multiple different types of occupation that really mirrors a lot of what we have seen traditionally in terms of the industries that are growing. Good question, though.
I'll see which one of you wants to take the next one. EDOs have traditionally been involved with promoting and creating full-time jobs. If there are communities that want to grow the gig economy, is there kind of like an equivalent that economic developers could do? For example, is it like a cluster? Is it a type of industry? It's a type of economy, I guess. So what can economic developers do to support the gig economy a little bit more?
Yeah, so I can start there, and then anyone can jump in if they'd like. I think really organizations, unfortunately, it's a little bit of a landmine when it comes to the gig economy right now. So, for instance, the California Supreme Court recently had a ruling where they had a new rule called the ABC rule. But really, what that meant is that that organizations within California couldn't hire a gig worker for a task or a job that would be considered as part of their normal course of business. And so that would make if that was adopted more broadly, that would make a huge difference in terms of who and what type of jobs could be included as gig workers and who needs to be actually hired as an employee. Worker classification right now, I think, is a huge struggle. Apart from that, so one, I think, is getting better rules on what worker classification is. I know that's not necessarily an economic development organization sort of role, but I definitely think that that's there. I think also, to the point of the conversation that we were having earlier around healthcare, retirement, working with those entities, like I'm thinking of like freelancers union, but anywhere where they're pooling together some of those types of some of those gig workers, I think it would be really important to partner with them to make sure that they're meeting the needs of their constituents there. So just offhand, those are the two that I can think of. Didn't know if any of my fellow panelists had any other ideas on exactly that.
Hey, Shane, this is Deborah Lyons. So yeah, I thought your answer was very good. I would like to build on it just a little bit. And that is that, a lot of this gig economy is the 1099 and, economies is it's often called as well. And I do think, it's definitely worth for economic developers and EDOs to understand, what is this 1099 workforce that they have, and you could do that just through a survey in your community and understand, where your businesses are looking at hiring, that might fit a gig economy, development strategy. So that would just be one thought is starting with a survey or maybe just hosting some roundtable discussions. Eventually one of the new things that happened is, there were incubators and having incubators, is now one of the things most of all communities have, or some type of incubator strategy. And so So there could be an idea that could be somewhat similar, you know, in being able to develop, well, what do we need to have to really enable a gig economy to grow? And does that give our community a differentiator? Does it give us a competitive advantage? You know, I think it's just understanding what are the sectors that you're looking to grow in, and what are the needs of industry, and how are they using maybe a gig workforce? So just some thoughts to add to Shane's answer.
Great, thank you so much, Deborah. We'll take this one last question for Shane. How long has the definition of full-time been 30 hours a week? This person's understanding was that this took effect in 2014 under the Affordable Care Act, but they'd like to know if that has been the case for a lot longer, or if this presents a recent shift of the needle, and what the implications would be of any adjustment to what defines as full-time.
Yeah, no, really good question. That was sort of a couple of reasons why we use 30. So one is historical. So we have kind of always defined the full-time workforce as more than 30 hours per week. That's more of a component of Gallup's work and making sure that we're kind of trending long term. I do think that, you know, more to the point of what does it mean to have 30 hours a week, or is it 40, or what is it? I think it just shows that that work today is and if we're talking about, you know, the future of work and being future ready, work today is super flexible. So, you know, I mean, we have folks that are working anywhere from on a part-time basis to full-time, and then 50 or 60 hours a week. So I think we're really challenging some of these categories around worker classification. Are you employee, or are you a contracted person? I think we're really flexing what it means to be working full-time, and what that means to be kind of a full-time employee. You know, while ours is done mostly out of trending purposes, you know, we could see where basically somewhere you need to draw the line in order to make some sort of decision about whether or not that person is covered for healthcare purposes. But really, I think it's really a shift towards this flexible work, and you know, anymore seeing folks that are 40 hours 9 to 5, I think is going to become more and more rare as we look towards the future.
Thank you so much, Shane, and thank you, John and Deborah, as well, for joining us for this webinar today. Just a reminder to the attendees to please fill out the survey, as you can access the presentation and also a free copy of the Future Ready report at the end of that evaluation. I'd leave you with one thought that a quote that I read earlier this week, that no one can see the future, but we can still make sure we are not blindsided when it arrives. So hopefully this presentation has given us some insight, and hope that you will join us for the remaining 2 webinars over the next couple of weeks: the Future of Technology Development and Commercialization on November 1, and the Future of Economic Development Practices on November 8. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us.